Woodrow Wilson was the governor of New Jersey and ran for president in 1912. He was the son of a Presbyterian minister and married a woman who was the daughter of a Presbyterian minister. Interestingly enough, her name was Ellen, and they were married for many years, had children. And then Ellen got Bright's disease, and within a little over a year of being diagnosed, died while he was president, one of the only first ladies to die in the White House. She died in August of 1914. Woodrow had a lot of other things going on with World War I and economic turmoil, which would eventually turn into the Great Depression, and really needed someone who could help him, and met a woman named Edith Galt in March of 2015, married her that same year in December 18th, 1915. And Edith was a wonderful help in the war effort. This isn't something I think that we in America even really could do today. Sadly enough, I don't think if there was a war that every American was behind, like when we went to Iraq and Afghanistan to fight terrorists, if they would have said, now we need people to use less sugar or less rubber, things like that, I don't know that people would do that now. But that was what they did then. Edith, they got some sheep so that they wouldn't have to mow the front lawn of the White House. They had the sheep out there just as a way to, and she observed all of the days that you don't have these things and the day that you don't have lights on. So she was a part of that war effort. But probably she's most famous for, in August of 1919, Woodrow Wilson had a series of strokes while he was in office. And she and others said that he was recovering, but it was pretty clear to those in the inner circle that Woodrow Wilson was greatly diminished and that he probably wasn't going to recover. Edith says that she never made a decision for Woodrow, but she definitely controlled the things that came across his desk so that it was only the most important things. Everything else, she and the physician would try to find out somebody else. But she read through all the official documents and was a major, major part in a greatly diminished Woodrow Wilson administration. Some have even called her the first female president of the United States. She had so much power in what she was doing. She's consistently around number 7 of the best first ladies that our country has seen. We focus on men in world history, but there are, and there have been, so many capable women. And the Old Testament, for being very man-centered because of God's dealing with people like Abraham and David and some of the others, Isaiah, as far as we know, there aren't any females that God used to write scripture, portions of it, of course, being quoted, but not as far as writing it down. But that doesn't mean that women were unimportant in the story that's unfolding in the Old Testament. And very, very often, again, the Bible portrays women in favorable light, especially around men who are either weak or indecisive or sinful and foolish. And so that's one of the stories we see today. Remember, again, just some examples of women in the Bible that were used of God, or at least that were prominent. Pilate's wife, who sent to him and said, have nothing to do with that just man. And if he'd taken her advice, he wouldn't be infamous. Of course, it was part of God's plan, we understand that, but there is this in Scripture, this pattern of women who are confronting men about what they need and should do. We have Moses' wife confronting him about not circumcising the sons. And then one of the probably greatest stories of a woman really seeing the need and taking charge in the midst of men who are making wrong decisions is here in 1 Samuel 25. It's the story of David and Abigail. If this seems familiar, I preached on this in a different way last year when we were going through the Bible. And so you say, well, you preached on this already. Well, I did preach on the passage, but just a different message. But David is on the run, remember? And as he's on the run, he makes a request of a man named Nabal. Nabal lived south of Hebron, kind of in the Judean wilderness a little bit. But David makes a request of Nabal and is denied. And he is so angry that he goes to confront Nabal and instead is confronted by this woman named Abigail. And we're going to use this to talk about the fact that there are some times that we as Christians have to confront people. Now, I think there is a certain kind of person that likes to confront people. But most of the people I hang around with and most of my friends, and I think probably most people in this church, are not those kind of people. If we confront somebody, it's generally only because we have to, only because there's a need. But if you're like me, I really don't like confronting people. And I've gotten a little better about that in my old age. As I get more mature, that's a good save, Josh. I've gotten a little better about that, but it's not something that I enjoy. If I confront somebody, it's usually because I have to, and if I can do it in a loving way, in a way that is gentle, I much rather do that. And I think there's some principles there we can learn from. But let's just talk about those times that you have to confront somebody, and you have to talk to them, how to do it, and when to do it. So we first of all see Nabal confronting David and Nabal getting in this fight. Verse 1 says, Samuel died, and all the Israelites were gathered together and lamented him and buried him in his house at Ramah. David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Now, Samuel hasn't been much of a help, but at least this was the last of the judges, the last of the great prophets. And he was sort of the one who at some point had kept Saul in check, and now he's not even there to do that. So this is just the way to start off the story, to say things are a little unstable. The spiritual leadership that was in the country is now gone. So verse 2 picks up the story. There was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. But the man was churlish and evil in his doings. He was of the house of Caleb. So we have, again, and this Carmel, I should say, is not the same Carmel that Elijah went up to the mountain of. It's a way, way different part of the country, but it's the same name. So here's this guy. He's a very wealthy man. You think about what Job had. Nabal is not that far away from what Job had, as far as even in that day. A very wealthy man. He was out shearing his sheep, and sheep shearing time was harvest. That was payday. That was the one time a year you got to just fill up your storage bins, and you could just, this is great. So from what I've been told, sheep give about, especially during this time, sheep now give 10 to 20 pounds of wool. Back then it was probably more like 1 to 2, but this would have been 3 tons of wool that he could have used for clothing or to sell. It was also just a time of great harvesting. And so here is Nabal. He's in a good day, and so this is a perfect time for David to come and ask for something. Now again, we're thinking about this in America, but back then, things in shepherding went a little differently. They had a lot of subcontractors and people that they would kind of hire out. So Nabal would have had some people that were kind of under him, shepherds that would take care of this portion of the flock, and sometimes they would hire protection. Now, Nabal didn't hire David, but as it turns out, while David was out there in the wilderness, he noticed Nabal's flocks and said, well, we're here. Men, we might as well just do the right thing and help him out. If there's any kind of predators that come through, any kind of marauding bands that want to go steal sheep, we'll fight them off. And this was a great benefit to Nabal. If Nabal had 3,000 sheep, let's say many of those were because David and his men were around to help protect that flock. So David's not out of line in asking what he does. In verse 4, David heard in the wilderness that Nabal did shear his sheep, and David sent out 10 young men. And David said to the young men, get you up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus shall ye say to him that liveth in prosperity, peace be both to thee, and peace to thine house, and peace be unto all that thou hast. And now I have heard that thou hast shearers. Now thy shepherds which were with us, we hurt them not. Neither was there aught missing unto them all the while they were in Carmel. Ask thy young men, and they will show thee. Wherefore let the young men find favor in thine eyes, for we come in a good day. Give, I pray thee, whatsoever cometh to thine hand unto thy servants and to thy son David. And when David's young men came, they spake to Nabal according to all those words in the name of David and ceased. So they said, hey, you don't owe us anything, but we helped out. We were there protecting you. We didn't take anything. We didn't harm any shepherds. We were helping you out. And if you're not sure about that, you can ask some of the young men that were out there watching the sheep, and you'll find out that we were a great asset to you. And if you have anything you'd like to pass on to us, we would greatly appreciate it. Okay? This happens all the time. People in the community have something that they're doing, and they go to business owners and they say, you don't have to, but would you consider giving us a donation of some kind? What does Nabal say? Well, verse 10, Nabal answered David's servants and said, who's David? And who is the son of Jesse? Now that proves that he knows who David is. It's more just a question of very dismissive. I don't care who David is. I don't care who you are. You're not going to get anything from me. There be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed from my shearers and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? So David's young men turned their way and went again and came and told him all those sayings. So again, the law of hospitality would be that he would give him something, and rather than give him something, he not only gives him nothing, but insults him. Oh, who's David? Another runaway slave? No thanks. Get out of here. And the 10 men go back and they tell David. Now, again, it would be easy enough just to give him something, but he feels like he can insult David. And there's a type of person that has to make everything worse. That when there's no situation that's so bad that they can't make just a little worse or a little bit more about them, a little more of a personal attack. A simple request turns into a burden, or now all of a sudden it's a you owe me kind of favor, or it's something that they remind you of, or something that they just feel like the impudence of you asking me for something, or it's an attack on your character for even needing to ask in the first place. Now, it's true that there are some people that only take. I think all of us know people that are just always taking. But even with those people, it doesn't have to be personal. You know, people come to the church asking for money, asking for some help in some way, and sometimes I feel like we can't help them. But I don't generally insult them. What's wrong with you? You can't even pay for your own bills? I generally say something like, I'm sorry, we aren't going to be able to help you this time. You know, if you started coming to church and we got to know you a little bit, we'd probably be a little more likely to help. It doesn't cost anything to come to church. And we would just like to help in other areas of your life rather than just giving you a check. You know, I try to do it as nicely as possible. You don't have to berate people, but there are some people that it's almost like a hobby. It's like they just have to attack somebody because there's this need that's presented. And this is Nabal. Nabal confronts David because he has to make it about him. Did you notice all the personal pronouns? Shall I take my sheep and my shear? Everything's about his fiefdom, and David has dared dip a toe asking for a breadcrumb from Nabal, and Nabal isn't having it. Let me ask you, are you one of these people like Nabal that's easily offended, easily angered? You like confronting people? You like the drama of going after people and you're just kind of looking for a fight? I grew up understanding that that's kind of the way our family was. My dad would talk about his dad and how we were just known for a long line of losing our temper. And I have really had to rely on the grace of God. I don't personally believe that that's a generational sin or a genetic thing. I believe that there could be some kind of genetic predisposition, you know, to anger. But I've really had to work and take on the grace of God to not be someone who's just indignant all the time. And when I see that crop up in my life, I'm really saddened because I really believe that the work of Christ in you is going to make you a lot more gentle. You think about all the things that Jesus was asked for in the Gospels. I mean, he even went on this campaign and the disciples came back and they said, let's go to a desert where nobody is just to get away. And wouldn't you know it, they're flocked with people. And Jesus doesn't say, just one night, that's all I want, just one night. Like we might be, like we might say, he gives of himself and keeps giving and keeps giving. And I'm just really trying to grow into Christ-likeness in some of those areas. But Nabal, of course, he wasn't like that. He was just ready to fight. He didn't even want to listen to the whole thing. He just wanted to jump right in, not investigate, and glad to say no. We ought to show much more benefit of the doubt and grace with people. And I think if we find ourselves this morning in that position of Nabal, where we're just ready to say no, ready to find fault, ready to be critical, then we really need to spend time asking God to take that part out of us, to teach us the heart of Christ, that when he was mistreated, he didn't show back any kind of irritation or anger. It's not like Jesus never confronted anybody. Obviously, he did. But have you noticed how little he did it with certain kinds of people? Remember the woman that came in and washed his feet? And all the people at the banquet were saying, if Jesus was a prophet, he would have known this woman's a sinner. Jesus knew that. In fact, he even said it. But what did he say to her about her sin? Thy sins be forgiven thee. Right? He didn't confront her about her sin because she knew about it already. There are times you have to confront people about their sin. We're going to read about that later in the life of David when Nathan has to come and say, you've done wrong and God's not happy with you and you need to know that. And David, to his credit, takes it well. It's not always an easy thing to confront. It's not always an easy thing to take criticism. I found in my marriage and in my friendships, it's a lot easier for me, if I know that I'm kind of thin-skinned anyway, to be able to say, I'd really like some feedback on this. Now, if I'm asking for feedback, then I'm more ready to take it. Do you ever ask for feedback? Do you ever say, hey, is there anything that I'm not seeing? Is there any blind spots? I don't always take it well when it's offered freely and when I'm not ready for it. There's a time you're ready for it. And again, maybe you should just be like that all the time. But if you're like me, a little bit of heads up is nice. But can we as Christians learn to say, you know what, I need to be the kind of person that when I'm in trouble, people don't feel like they have to walk around on eggshells around me. That people feel like they can come to me and say, hey, you're wrong, and this isn't right. Here's Nabal, and he needs confronting because he's done something wrong. But David is not going to confront Nabal in the right way. And not at all. Look at verse number 13. David said unto his men, well, you win some, you lose some. No, he says, gird ye on every man his sword. Now, why in the world would you gird on a sword? Well, only if you're going to go and kill somebody. So he gets 400 of his men. David also girded on his sword, and they went up after David, about 400 men, and 200 abode by the stuff. All right, we're going to take 2/3 of our force. We're going to go wipe out everything that belongs to Nabal. And you say, well, I don't know if that's really what was going to happen. Maybe they're just going to have a talk. Well, look at verse number 21. David had said, surely in vain have I kept all that this fellow hath in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that pertained unto him, and he hath requited me evil for good. So and more also do God unto the enemies of David, if I leave of all that pertain unto him by the morning light. I'm going to wipe out everybody, all the males in the house. I'm going to kill them all, he says. I'm going to go and wipe everybody out. Now, David is not responding well. This wasn't a criticism on David. This was just a rejection of what he asked. David could have said, again, well, the Lord will provide that in some way. But he doesn't. He's so insulted that he goes. And now, because one person's sin has now affected another person's sin. Now, when this sort of thing happens, you don't have the right to say, well, they made me sin, because every sin against you is an opportunity to show Christ-likeness in forgiveness and grace and love. That's not an easy thing to do. That's something the Lord's working on me about again, and hopefully you as well. But there is this moment where David has a chance to do the right thing, and very obviously he doesn't. The Biblical Illustrator commentary says this: one of the most characteristic features in David's temper and behavior throughout all these weary years was his self-control. But the rampart of self-restraint built by long habit went down like a neglected seawall before the sudden paroxysm of passion which Nabal's insulting words aroused. They were fellow Judites. They maybe even knew each other. Obviously, Nabal knew who Jesse was and knew who David was and refused to help. And David is so indignant, he feels like the earth needs to be unburdened by this man. And so he's off to kill Nabal and everybody. Well, verse 14 is where Abigail comes into the story. One of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, "Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he railed on them." He just took them to task. He didn't just refuse them, he made them feel small. "But the men were very good unto us, and we were not hurt, neither missed we anything, as long as we were conversant or living with them when we were in the fields. And they were a wall unto us, both by night and day, all the while we were with them, keeping the sheep." All right, so he says, this is the situation. David's men were good to us. This wasn't a bad ask, but Nabal railed on them. Verse 17, "Now therefore know and consider what thou wilt do, for evil is determined against our master and against all his household. For he is such a son of Belial that a man cannot speak to him." Son of Belial means a worthless person. He is so worthless. And so this master is saying this about his boss to his boss's wife. But everybody agrees, this guy is a piece of work. He is something else. He is a worthless person. And he says, I can't go talk to him about this. I can't confront Nabal, because if I said Nabal, do you know what David and his men are capable of? Do you know how quickly they rescued Keilah? I mean, because later on we're going to read about these mighty men. One of the mighty men found a lion in a pit and jumped down into the pit to kill the lion. These guys don't mess around, right? One of these guys went up against an Egyptian who had a spear with nothing but a staff in his hand, took the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and killed him with it, right? These guys don't mess around. And this young man was out there, and he's like, I saw them practice their slinging. I saw them practice their fighting. And if they are going to do what I think they're going to do, they're coming for us. And Abigail, you've got to do something about it. Otherwise, we're all going to die. Now, here she is, and she has to do something. She's going to save her household. So she provides some food right away. Verse 18, Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 bottles of wine and 5 sheep ready dressed and 5 measures of parched corn and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on asses. And she said unto her servants, "Go on before me. And behold, I come after you." But she told not her husband Nabal. Wise woman. She says, let's get this stuff ready and send it off. As soon as it's ready, I'm guessing as soon as those 200 fig cakes were on that donkey, she said, go. Get there as quickly as you can. I'll follow. And as soon as she was ready, she got on a donkey and she tried to get to David first. They're trying to head off this disaster that's been created by her moron husband. Verse 20, and it was so as she rode on the ass that she came down by the covert of the hill, and behold, David and his men came down against her, and she met them. So now she has the chance. She has a gift. She has what David's looking for, and probably it was way more than she was expecting. If we had time on your own, go and just think about how much food this was. Now, I don't know how long it would feed 600 people, plus their wives and children and everybody else that was with them. I don't know how much it would feed, but it was something. Because these guys are out here and they either have to hunt or they have to forage. They have to do something. They're not farming because they're on the run and they have to stay hidden. So this was a great benefit to them. So she brings the food, but now it's not just about the food. She has to talk to David. Again, if I had time to talk about her speech, but her speech is a master course on confronting people well, on talking to people about their problems. I want to give you just 5 points from her talk about how, and things that we can incorporate if you have to confront somebody. And in this case, Abigail is confronting a stranger that she knows is angry with her or her household. She has to do something. And I don't know how she learned this, except probably years of being married to Nabal. She learned to get around things. She was just a wise woman, probably a very godly woman, probably someone we'll see in heaven someday. But she had this way of talking to David. First of all, she recognizes that he has been sinned against. Verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she hasted and lighted off the ass and fell before David on her face and bowed herself to the ground and fell at his feet and said unto him, Upon me, my Lord, upon me let this iniquity be, and let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak in thine audience and hear the words of thine handmaid. She says, this was a wrong. You were wronged. You have every right to be angry. Let this wrong be on me. I'm not going to say that you haven't been wrong. What we did was wrong. What we did was not just against cultural norms of hospitality, but you deserved a lot better than that, and we trespassed against you. Now, again, when you're talking with someone, you don't always have to agree. I'm not saying, that you go to somebody and you say, you make up something to be sorry for, because I think that also just makes it so that other people can walk all over you. You don't have to, honestly, apologizing for something that you didn't do is a lie. But you can say, I see that you're upset about what happened, and I want to have a chance to try to explain what happened, but you have a right to be angry about this thing. Or I know that you're angry. It's not just a don't be angry anymore. I can see that you're angry, and I would like to try to talk to you about that. Sometimes people get so frustrated just because it feels like people don't understand them. People don't really think that they have a right to be angry or upset. And just you acknowledging, yeah, I see how this would bother you. And you don't have to say, I agree with you. But just to say, I can see why you are upset, why you're angry about this. Let's talk about that. She goes right in and says, this was an iniquity, let it be on me. She wants the best for him and for Nabal. And so she is able to kind of thread this needle with him. 2, she offered a different perspective. Verse 25, let not my Lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, thine handmaid, saw not the young man of my Lord, whom thou didst send. All right, so, and this is a really hard thing. So when Zach read this morning and the word fool comes up in Proverbs, that word in the Hebrew is spelled Nabal. That's what the word fool is translated to in the Hebrew. So the guy's name was literally fool. Now there's speculation, was this like something that people called him like behind closed doors? Is that kind of more the thing? Or a lot of commentators think that, Hebrew language is not really clean and neat, so one word can have several meanings, and possibly his parents had this other meaning for it, but it just so happened that he was this as well. He was a fool. And Abigail says, been living with this guy since we got married. How she ended up with him, we don't know, but she says, his name is Nabal, and it fits. He's just a fool. And what else is she supposed to say, right? What else is she supposed to say? She says, he's a fool, but listen, if I had known that you were looking for something, I would have done something, and that's what I'm doing. I didn't know, but here I am, and I'm here to rectify the situation. She is speaking for her household. Listen, Nabal being who he is, there are a whole lot of people in that household that aren't like him. They're not fools. They're not railing against you. Can I speak up for them? You have a right to be angry at Nabal, but let me speak for the other people that if you're not careful, you're going to hurt. We need to try to find a balance between not defending ourselves about everything, but also not making excuses, and the perspective. I'm not sure that you're seeing this with everything. It is true, isn't it? Have you ever had a situation where you were just positive, this is what's going on, this is what's happening? Oh, there's no other way that this could be. Amy and we joke all the time, well, it's either A, B, or C. And we know what those things are, whatever the situation is, it's either one of these things. And then we always joke, but it's probably D, the thing we don't know. And I'll tell you, probably 7 out of 10 times, it's that fourth one that, we didn't know what was going on, why someone was motivated to do this thing, why they acted that way. It's some kind of unknown. And especially in northern Minnesota, I feel like people are a little more closed in, where they're not going to explain to you exactly why they're doing what they're doing. And that's why it's so important for us not only to give it a second to think, maybe that's not really what's going on here. But 2, if we can, to help somebody else to say, I don't know that you have the whole picture here. whether it's a background in the way that they look at things, whether it's a special circumstance, even if it's a stressful day. A stressful day doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it helps explain a little bit of why they acted so uncharacteristically. I think it's important for us to be able to bring in another perspective. If we're going to confront somebody, to be able to say, I wonder if you had all the facts when you made that assumption. 3, she pleads with him to see God's hand in it. And this is the most important part of what she says. Look at verse 26. Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, seeing the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood, and from avenging thyself with thine own hand, now let thine enemies and they that seek evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now this blessing which thine handmaid hath brought unto my Lord, let it even be given unto the young men that follow my Lord. I pray thee, forgive the trespass of thine handmaid, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord fighteth the battles of the Lord, and evil hath not been found in thee all thy days. Yet a man is risen to pursue thee and to seek thy soul. But the soul of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord thy God, and the soul of thine enemies, them shall he sling out as out of the middle of a sling. And it shall come to pass, when the Lord shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he hath spoken concerning thee, and shall have appointed thee ruler over Israel, that this be no grief unto thee. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But notice she says, aren't you glad, David, that the Lord stopped you from coming to do this foolish thing? The Lord has been watching out for you. You've been pursued, even though you haven't done anything wrong, and you have been wronged by Saul, but the Lord has watched out for you, and he will bring you into the kingdom. And David, when you get to be king, I would hate for this to be something that you regret. She is putting everything in. Can we consider the hand of the Lord in all of this? And that is where you as a Christian can give a perspective that honestly, even if it's not something where that's one thing talking to other Christians, but talking to someone who's not a believer at all, just to be able to say, you don't understand what God's maybe doing in this situation. You don't understand what things God is working behind the scenes. And it may be that all of this is happening for good reasons. I think even people, especially in this area, have this idea. One, oh, things just kind of work out. Or, oh, there's a plan. Or even maybe something spiritual. The good Lord knows what he's doing. All those things happen to be true. But let's not deal in truisms. Let's deal in what the Bible says. Is it true or not that God is sovereign? Is it true or not that God can make even things that have been done to you by the sinfulness of others to redound to goodness for you? Yeah, we have lots of examples of that in the Bible, right? I said earlier when I was talking about Job that Job is the story of what happens when bad things happen to good people. Do you know that that's actually only happened once, ever? There's only been one good person, Jesus Christ, the perfect. And when he never did anything wrong. The Bible says the wages of sin is death, meaning the paycheck that you collect for sinning is death. Jesus collected that paycheck, but he didn't earn it. He collected it because we earned it. I'm a sinner, and you're a sinner. And you and I are deserving of the lake of fire and the second death. But Jesus Christ took that on himself. So we see even if you were perfect, even if you did everything right, you're still going to be sinned against. And Jesus Christ taking on him sin brought about the goodness that you and I can very simply go to God and say, God, I believe I'm a sinner, but I believe Jesus died for me. I'm taking you for that promise that you said that I could have forgiveness. If I believe that Jesus died for me, I'm taking that to myself. And the Bible says if you'll believe with your heart that you'll be saved, that you'll be forgiven, that you'll be made into a new man. And that's available for everybody. But we wouldn't have that if it hadn't been for this bad that was in it. And Peter says in Acts chapter 2 that he says, ye have by wicked hands have slain Jesus, but he also says it was by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God. God planned the crucifixion even as it was, planned the crucifixion in the sinfulness of man, allowing it to happen so that great good could come out of it. Now, again, You maybe have that perspective. You think about Joseph and his brothers and how at the end Joseph said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Do you as a Christian believe that God is in all of that? And can you bring that perspective to other people who are saying, I just don't know why all this is happening, to be able to say, I don't know that I have all the answers, but isn't it a great thing to know that God is at work and that he's not doing things to make it harder for you without making a way for it to be ultimately good for you in the end? We need friends, we need a church family who, in those rough moments, can remind us of that perspective. Now, there's a timing for it, there's a way, but I'm saying she reminds him of God's hand in all of it. And she says, I'm so glad that I found out about this so I could come and talk to you before you did something that would have sinned against God. God's been protecting you. God's been looking out for you. That's very obvious, and he will continue to do so until you're king. So I'm glad that I could be used of God to come and stop you from doing this. And that really makes David think and pause of what he's doing. Fourth, she reminds him of the consequences. Again, in verse 30, it shall come to pass when the Lord shall have done to my Lord all that good that he hath spoken concerning thee, and shall have appointed thee ruler over Israel, that this event shall be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord, either that thou hast shed blood causeless, or that my Lord hath avenged himself. But when the Lord shall have dealt well with my Lord, then remember thine handmaid. She says, I would hate for you to take the kingdom and have this regret that in a low moment you went and killed an entire household just because you were angry. In the end, you'll see that this would have been the wrong thing to do. And I'm glad that you were able to be here in this moment to stop you from doing that. Isn't it true that when we're being tempted by Satan, Satan very often hides the consequences of that sinful action or sinful decision? I mean, he doesn't show you everything. And isn't it a great thing to have friends who will confront you to say, listen, you don't understand all of what's going on, but this is dangerous for you. We've told our kids, listen, you're not in love yet, but one day you're going to be, and one day you're going to be so smitten that you're not going to listen to a thing we're going to have to say to you. I'm telling you now while you're in your right mind, and honestly, being in love and losing your mind is wonderful, so I'm not even denigrating that. I'm just saying sometimes when you're in that, you don't always make right decisions. And so I'm saying just make a covenant with us now. Make a promise that you'll hear us out, that we're not trying to blow you up, but that we're trying to do the best for you. We want to be able to say, not when you're in the midst of it, but hey, I'm looking out for you. And it's always a very worrisome thing when people in the church start shedding the friends that they have in the church, because it means that they're not only making bad choices, but they're trying to make worse ones. We as a church need to be able to rally around those people and confront them lovingly because they know we care about them. That sometimes takes building up relationships now when things are good. Right? We find out somebody in the church is sinning, and everybody in the church calls them and says, you shouldn't do that. Well, that's just going to make it seem like we're some kind of cult. It's not like we wouldn't still do it, but I'm saying, isn't it better when there's a relationship there? Now, Abigail doesn't have that luxury, but she says to him, I'm going to remind you of the consequences. And David hears her out. Fifth, she reminds him that God is the avenger. She says at the end of verse 31, when the Lord hath dealt well with my Lord, then remember thine handmaid. God is going to be the avenger. You let him handle this. Maybe for us, we say, sleep on this. I know you're angry. Go ahead and eat something. Maybe you're not feeling the best, but just take a moment to consider what God might do. See what God will do with this. He'll give you wisdom to deal with this. And thankfully, because David who he was, it worked. Verse 32, David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me. And blessed be thy advice, and blessed be thou, which hath kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with mine own hand. For in very deed, as the Lord God of Israel liveth, which hath kept me back from hurting thee, except thou hast hasted and come to meet me, surely there had not been left unto Nabal by morning anybody, any male in the whole house. That would have been it. That would have been it. And David says, he kind of comes to himself and says, yeah, you're right. I'm so glad that I didn't go any further with this. It's a great thing because he hears it and accepts it and he leaves. And he understands that God's ways are the best. We need to be able to remind others of that truth. Sometimes people need to be confronted about their sin. Nathan, again, will do that with David later. And you can do it in love and concern. And if you're building those relationships now, then the confrontation won't seem like such a confrontation after all. God also takes care of Abigail, too. Abigail doesn't confront Nabal right away. She goes home and he's drunk. And you cannot talk to a drunk person. You cannot reason with them. It's not going to work at all. I talked to a drunk person today about getting me a bid, and I still haven't heard back. And I'm like, I wonder if he even knows that I was there. I wonder if he's like, was that a dream? That was a weird dream. But you can't talk to him. So she says, I'm not even going to go there. I'm not going to talk to him. And but then in the morning she says, and I don't know how she says it. I wish maybe in heaven they'll show the movie of how everything went out. This is the way I imagine it. It's probably not the way it happened, but Nabal, he's got a headache. He's been drunk the night before. He's got a headache. Nabal, because you turned away David's men, we almost all died. So I gave him this and went to talk to him. And either he was so like, whoa, we almost died, or whoa, you gave him all of that, or so indignant that she would go behind his back. We don't know exactly, but the Bible says his heart died within him and he became as a stone. He had a heart attack or a stroke or something and was bedridden, alone with his own thoughts for 10 days before he died. She didn't have to do anything. David didn't have to do anything. Everybody lived except the guy that caused the trouble in the first place, Nabal. And then David sends to Abigail and says, would you be my wife? I've noticed you're prudent and kind, and you would be a real asset to me and a help. And she says, I'll go. Now, unfortunately, we really don't know anything about Abigail after this. She has a son named Daniel, and he's the second in line, but totally gets overpassed by Amnon and Ahithophel and Absalom, so we don't know what was with him. But I'm looking forward to seeing her one day, if for no other reason to be able to say, you helped me to see how to lovingly confront people with wisdom and prudence to get people to do the right thing. Aren't you glad for people like Abigail? Aren't you glad for people in your own life? Maybe tonight when we give testimonies, we'll talk about people in your life that have confronted you lovingly to get you, to talk you down from that thing that you were going to do in sin. I'm thankful for Abigail, and may God use us in the same way to be able to do God's work on behalf of others in confronting others.